You don't run away from home 7 times in a single year just because you don't like the curfew or because you want to go to a party. You don't sleep under bridges, hitchhike with strangers, or curl up in the back of unlocked cars in freezing temperatures just because you are being a rebellious teenager. When I saw the file on my desk regarding a 16-year-old girl named Maya, the very first thing that hit me wasn't her behavioral record, which was long and colorful, but the sheer desperation required to leave the safety of a home that many times a child who feels safe, a child who feels heard, does not repeatedly eject themselves into a world that is predatory and dangerous. That is a fundamental truth of human psychology that I have stood by for decades. When a child runs, they are usually running away from something painful or running toward something they think will fill a void, and usually it is a tragic combination of both. But the narrative I was being fed by her parents, a couple who looked for all the world like the pillars of their suburban community, was that Maya was simply broken. They claimed she was addicted to the drama, that she was a pathological liar, and that they were the victims of her terror campaign. I sat in my dressing room looking at the monitors before we went on stage, watching the raw feed from the green rooms. In one room you had the parents, let's call them Robert and Cynthia. They weren't pacing. They weren't holding hands or looking distraught in the way I usually see parents whose child is missing or living on the edge of death. They were angry. Robert was checking his watch, clearly inconvenienced by the delay in production, and Cynthia was fixing her makeup with a precision that felt surgical. They looked ready for a board meeting, not an intervention to save their daughter's life. In the other room, separated by a hallway and a whole lot of emotional distance, sat Maya. She was curled into the corner of the sofa, knees pulled up to her chest, wearing a hoodie that looked 3 sizes too big, like she was trying to disappear inside of it. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was staring at the wall with a hollow 1,000-yard stare that you usually see in combat veterans, not high school sophomores. That visual disconnect between the parent's annoyance and the child's devastation told me everything I needed to know before I ever stepped out onto that stage. The central problem here wasn't just the running away, it was the fact that nobody believed her reasons for doing it. The police had brought her back home 6 times. Each time Robert and Cynthia had met the officers at the door with a calm, practiced sorrow, explaining that their daughter was off her medication, that she was having an episode, that she was a compulsive fabulist who made up stories to get attention. The authorities, seeing a nice house, 2 well-dressed parents, and a screaming, hysterical teenager, did the math that society teaches them to do. They sided with the adults. They handed Maya back to the people she was fleeing from, reinforcing the terrifying reality that she was trapped. By the time she reached my show, she had stopped screaming. She had learned that making noise didn't work. She had learned that the truth didn't matter if you didn't have the credibility to sell it. She was labeled a problem child, a bad seed, and ungovernable. Those are labels that stick, and they are labels that adults use to absolve themselves of responsibility. I walked onto the set, the lights hitting me, the audience applause swelling, but my mind was locked on that girl. I knew that today was going to be a battle not with her, but for her. I started the show by laying out the facts, not the emotions, but the hard data. 7 runaways in 12 months, multiple interactions with law enforcement, failing grades, self-harm. It was a resume of trauma. When I introduced Robert and Cynthia, they walked out with their heads held high, offering polite waves to the audience. They sat down, crossed their legs, and looked at me with an expectancy that I would join their team. They wanted me to be the ultimate authority figure who would finally scare their daughter into submission. They wanted Dr. Phil to fix the broken part of their machine so they could go back to their pristine lives. I turned to Robert first. I asked him simply, "Why are we here?" He didn't hesitate. He launched into a prepared speech about how they had given Maya everything, private tutors, a car, therapy, vacations, and how she had thrown it all back in their faces with vitriol and disrespect. He painted a picture of a household under siege where he and his wife were walking on eggshells, afraid of the next explosion. He talked about Maya like she was a tenant they couldn't evict rather than a child they were supposed to protect. He used words like manipulative, calculated, and cruel. He told a story about the last time she ran away, claiming she had stolen $200 from his wallet and vanished into the night just to ruin their anniversary dinner. He didn't mention where she went. He didn't mention if she was cold or hungry. He focused entirely on the inconvenience and the theft. Then Cynthia chimed in, her voice softer but no less icy. She played the martyr. She spoke about how embarrassing it was to have the police cruisers in the driveway so often, how the neighbors were talking, how Maya's behavior was reflecting on the family's reputation. She looked at me and said, "Dr. Phil, we don't know what is wrong with her brain. She just lies about everything. She tells people we beat her. She tells people we starve her. It's mortifying." That was the hook. That was the moment the dynamic revealed itself. They were more concerned with the mortification of the accusation than the reality of the girl's experience. I looked at him and I said, "So you're telling me that this girl who has access to a credit card, a warm bed, and a loving family chooses to sleep in a drainage pipe, which is where the police found her 2 weeks ago because she wants to embarrass you? You think she is enduring hypothermia and the risk of assault just to ruin your reputation?" Robert stiffened. "You don't know her, Dr. Phil. She's stubborn. Once she commits to a lie, she will do anything to keep it up. She's committed to the role of the victim." Well, I said, leaning in, I've been doing this a long time, and I have met a lot of liars. I have met a lot of manipulators. But I have never met a 16-year-old girl who would rather freeze to death than sleep in her own bed unless that bed felt like a coffin. Behavior is a language, and right now your daughter is screaming at the top of her lungs, and you two are complaining about the noise. I could feel the tension in the room shift. The audience, who had initially been nodding along with the parents' reasonable-sounding complaints, started to get uncomfortable. They were beginning to sense what I had sensed backstage. This wasn't a case of a rebellious teen. This was a case of survival. When we brought Maya out, the change in the atmosphere was palpable. She didn't walk out with attitude. She didn't roll her eyes or stomp her feet. She walked out like a ghost. She sat in the chair furthest from her parents, curling her body inward. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. She stared at her boots. I knew I had to tread lightly. If I came at her with the same energy I used on her parents, she would shut down completely. She expected me to be another adult who would tell her she was crazy. She expected me to team up with the people who were hurting her. "Maya," I said, keeping my voice low, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the audience, "I'm not here to yell at you. I'm not here to tell you to clean your room or do your homework. I'm just trying to understand the math here. Your dad says you ran away to ruin their anniversary. Is that true?" She didn't answer immediately. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. Her mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as if to say, "See, this is what we deal with." Let her answer. I snapped at Cynthia, not looking away from the girl. "Maya." Maya finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She looked at me, assessing whether I was friend or foe. "It wasn't their anniversary," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in days. "It was Tuesday." "Okay," I said. "It was Tuesday." "Why did you leave on Tuesday?" "Because he locked the fridge," she said. The statement was so simple, so bizarre, and yet delivered with such flat affect that it sucked the air out of the room. "He locked the fridge," I repeated, making sure I heard her correctly. "He put a chain on it," she continued, her voice gaining a tiny bit of strength. "And the pantry. He said I didn't deserve to eat their food if I wasn't going to be respectful. He said I could eat." When I apologized for my attitude, I was hungry, so I took the money to buy food. And I left because I didn't want to beg him for a sandwich. "That is a lie." Robert exploded from the other chair, his face turning a shade of crimson that betrayed a volatile temper simmering just beneath the surface. "We have never starved her. She steals food. She binges. We had to secure the food because she was eating us out of house and home, out of spite. It's a control mechanism for her health." I held up a hand to stop him. This was the opening. This was the crack in the facade. You don't chain a refrigerator shut for a child's health unless you are operating in a zone of extreme dysfunction. I looked back at Maya. You ran away because you were hungry. I ran away because I'm invisible, she said, looking straight at her father. Unless I'm in trouble, I don't exist. And when I am in trouble, I wish I didn't exist. This was the backstory beginning to unravel. We weren't looking at a spoiled brat. We were looking at a system of control and deprivation that had been masquerading as discipline. To understand how a family gets to this point, you have to peel back the layers of history, and usually that history is written in the silence of the things that aren't said. When Robert exploded about the food, claiming it was for her health, I saw the mechanism of this family clearly for the first time. It was a mechanism of gaslighting. Gaslighting is an overused term these days, but in this context, it was the clinical definition denying a person's reality to the point where they question their own sanity. Maya had been told for years that her hunger was greed, that her need for privacy was secrecy, and that her desire for autonomy was rebellion. I had my production team pull up the photos that Maya had managed to take on a burner phone she hid from her parents, a phone she had bought with money scavenged from returning aluminum cans. I projected the images onto the giant screen behind us. The audience gasped. It wasn't just a child-proof lock on a cabinet. It was a heavy-duty industrial padlock and chain wrapped around the handles of a stainless steel refrigerator. It looked like something you would see in a prison commissary or a hardware store, not a suburban kitchen. Help me understand this, Robert, I said, pointing to the screen. You are telling me that this is a parenting tool. You are telling me that locking a 16-year-old girl away from an apple or a glass of milk is an act of love. Robert didn't flinch. He adjusted his tie, looking at the screen with a detachment that was chilling. You are looking at the result, Dr. Phil, not the cause. We tried gentle parenting. We tried talking. She would go in there at 3 a.m. and destroy the kitchen. It was defiance, pure and simple. We had to protect our property and her health. Property, I repeated. You're worried about your property. You're worried about a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Meanwhile, your daughter is sleeping under an overpass because she feels less threatened by strangers than she does by her own father. Cynthia interjected then, her voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and irritation. We were afraid she would hurt herself with the food, Dr. Phil. It's an eating disorder. We read about it online. We were trying to stop the binging. I turned to Maya. Do you have an eating disorder, Maya? Maya shook her head slowly. I don't binge. I just wasn't allowed to eat dinner with them because I didn't finish my chores correctly, or because I had a tone. So I would get hungry at night. And if I went to get food, they would wake up and scream at me. So I tried to be quiet, but then they put the locks on. And then they put the cameras up. Cameras, I asked, looking back at the parents. For security, Robert said quickly, she brings boys over. She sneaks out. We have to monitor the perimeter. I'm not talking about the perimeter, Maya said, her voice cutting through his defense. I'm talking about the one in my room, the one in the vent. The room went dead silent. This was the escalation. This was the moment where the surveillance state of this household was fully exposed. I looked at Robert, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew he had gone too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. It's a nanny cam, Robert scoffed, trying to minimize it. We needed to make sure she wasn't doing drugs. She has a history of erratic behavior. We have a right to know what happens under our roof. She is 16, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as granite. She is a young woman. You have a camera in her bedroom. You are watching her get dressed. You are watching her sleep. Robert, that isn't parenting. That is predation. That is a gross violation of privacy that borders on abusive voyeurism. You are stripping her of every ounce of dignity she has, and then you wonder why she runs. This is where the dynamic shifted from defensive to aggressive. Robert didn't like being cornered. He stood up, pointing a finger at Maya. You ungrateful little brat. You come on national television and paint us as perverts after everything we paid for, after the lawyers we hired to keep you out of juvenile detention. I wouldn't be in juvenile detention if you didn't call the cops every time I walked out the door to breathe, Maya yelled back, standing up for the first time. The blanket slipped off her shoulders. She was trembling not with fear anymore, but with a rage that had been bottled up for years. You called the police on me for walking to the park. You told them I was suicidal so they would handcuff me. You wanted them to scare me straight, but you just made me hate you. Sit down, Robert roared. No, I interjected, stepping between them. Nobody is sitting down, and nobody is telling anybody to shut up. Robert, take your seat. Now, I used my physical presence to push him back. I'm a big guy, and I know how to use my space. Robert sat fuming his jaw, working overtime. Cynthia was weeping now, hiding her face in her hands, mumbling about how humiliation this all was. This is the cycle, I said, turning to the audience and then back to the family. This is the game you are playing. You push her until she breaks, she reacts, and then you punish the reaction. You are setting fires and then blaming her for the smoke. You say she ran away 7 times. I'm looking at this file and I'm seeing that on 3 of those occasions she didn't run away, you kicked her out. I picked up the file from the table next to my chair. October 14th. Police report states that the father, Robert, told the minor child to get out and don't come back following an argument over a report card. Maya slept in the neighbor's potting shed. Is that true, Cynthia? Cynthia looked up, her mascara running. He didn't mean it. It was heat of the moment. She should have known he didn't mean it. She took it literally just to make a point. She stayed in that shed to punish us. She took it literally because she is a child and he is her father. I said, exasperated, when a parent tells a child to leave, the child leaves. That isn't manipulation, that is obedience. You are twisting her compliance into an act of aggression. The escalation was reaching a fever pitch. We weren't just talking about rules anymore. We were talking about a fundamental breakdown of reality. The parents were rewriting history in real time to suit their narrative of victimhood. They truly believed that Maya's survival instincts were calculated attacks on their happiness. I didn't stay in the shed to punish you, Maya, said her voice cracking. I stayed there because it was quiet, because nobody was yelling, because there were no cameras. And the drugs, Robert snapped, trying to deflect the heat back onto her. Tell Dr. Phil about the pills we found. They were aspirin, Maya screamed. I had a headache from crying all day. We didn't know that, Robert shouted back. They were white pills in a baggie. We have to assume the worst. You always assume the worst, Maya cried out. That's the problem. You think I'm a monster, so you treat me like a monster, and then you get mad when I don't act like an angel. This was the core of the conflict. The escalation had revealed the self-fulfilling prophecy at the heart of this family. Robert and Cynthia had created a villain in their minds, and they were forcing Maya to audition for the role every single day. They were so addicted to the chaos of managing a problem child that they couldn't see the terrified human being right in front of them. I knew we were approaching the breaking point. Maya was hyperventilating. Robert was on the verge of physical intimidation. Cynthia was useless in her passivity. I had to intervene hard, and I had to do it now before Maya shut down again or Robert walked off the stage. This wasn't about finding a middle ground anymore. The middle ground was a combat zone. This was about separating the combatants and stripping away the weapons. Stop, I commanded, holding up both hands. Everybody stop. We are done with the he said, she said. We are done with the accusations. I have heard enough to know that this house is not a home. It is a battleground. And Maya, you are an unarmed civilian in a war zone. I turned to Robert, leaning in close so he couldn't look away. You want to talk about authority, you want to talk about control, let's talk about the fact that you have failed. You have failed to make your daughter feel safe. You have failed to build trust. You have failed to be the leader of this family. You are ruling by fear, and fear has a shelf life. It expired 7 runaways ago, You are losing her, Robert. In fact, looking at her right now, I'd say you've already lost her. The only question left is whether you care enough to try and win her back, or if you just want to be right. Robert stared at me, his face purple, his breathing heavy. For a second, I thought he might take a swing at me. It wouldn't have been the first time a guest thought about it. But then the fight drained out of him, replaced by a sullen, defensive pout. I just want her to be normal, he muttered. Normal is gone, I told him bluntly. We left normal back at the first padlock. We are trying to find functional now. And to get there, we are going to have to tear this entire system down to the studs. When you strip away the noise, the yelling, the accusations, the dramatic retellings of past arguments, what you are left with is the raw, exposed nerve of the relationship. That's the confrontation phase. It's not about me confronting them, it's about forcing them to confront themselves. I had Robert and Cynthia on the ropes, their defenses battered by the sheer absurdity of their own logic when reflected back at them. But the real breakthrough hadn't happened yet. They were embarrassed, yes. They were defensive, absolutely. But they hadn't yet felt the gravity of what they had done. They were still viewing Maya as a problem to be solved, not a person to be healed. I turned my chair fully toward Maya. The audience was silent, the tension in the studio thick enough to choke on. Maya, I said gently, I want you to tell them what happens next. Not what happened last week. Tell them what happens if nothing changes today. If you go back to that house with the locks and the cameras and the yelling, what happens next? Maya looked at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. I won't go back, she said. I'll run again. And this time, I won't let the police find me. I've met people on the street, people who said they could help me disappear. I was too scared to go with them before. But if I have to go back to that house, I'll go with them. I don't care what happens to me. Anything is better than being a prisoner. A gasp went through the audience. I saw Cynthia's hand fly to her mouth. Even Robert seemed to shrink a little in his seat. The reality of what she was saying, that she would choose the high probability of human trafficking or death over living with them, landed like a physical blow. Did you hear that I asked Robert, my voice, low and devoid of anger now? I wasn't debating him anymore. I was delivering the news. She is telling you that she is contemplating suicide by proxy. She is willing to walk into the lion's den just to get away from you. That isn't rebellion, Robert. That is despair. That is a child who has lost the will to fight for her own safety because her safety has never been prioritized by the people who gave her life. Robert looked down. He rubbed his temples. I didn't know it was that bad. I thought she was just acting out. You didn't know because you weren't listening, I said. You were too busy policing the behavior to understand the motivation. You were treating the symptoms, the running, the yelling, while the disease was eating away at the foundation of your family. The disease is a lack of connection. It is a lack of empathy. I stood up and walked over to the large monitor again. I signaled the control room. I want to show you one more thing. Maya didn't know we had this. But when my team was doing their background research, they spoke to your former school counselor, the one you fired, Robert. Robert looked up sharply. She was feeding Maya's delusions. She was undermining our parental authority. She was the only person Maya trusted. I corrected him, and she gave us a letter that Maya wrote 2 years ago. It was an assignment. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Do you want to know what your daughter wrote? I didn't wait for permission. I read it from the screen. It was short, handwritten in messy, looped cursive. In 10 years, I hope I am far away. I hope I have a small apartment with a lock on the door that only I have the key to. I hope I have a fridge full of food that nobody counts. And I hope I don't remember my parents' voices anymore, because right now their voices are the loudest things in the world and they only say bad things. Cynthia broke down completely. It wasn't the polite weeping from earlier. It was a guttural sob. The realization that her daughter's dream for the future was simply the absence of her parents was a devastating blow to her maternal identity. Robert stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. His jaw went slack. The anger that had fueled him for the first half of the show was gone, replaced by a hollow shock. That's your legacy, Robert, I said. That's what you're building. You aren't raising a daughter. You are raising a survivor who is counting the days until she can escape you. Is that what you want? Is that the hill you want to die on? That you were right about the rules, but you lost the child? Robert looked at Maya, really looked at her maybe for the first time in years. He saw the oversized hoodie, the tired eyes, the defensive posture. He saw the damage. No, he whispered. No, that's not what I want. I wanted her to be safe. I thought if I controlled everything, she couldn't get hurt. The world is scary, Dr. Phil. I see the news. I see what happens to girls. I thought if I kept her in, she'd be safe. But you became the thing she was scared of, I said. You became the monster in the closet. You can't protect someone by destroying their spirit. Control is not protection. Connection is protection. If she trusts you, she comes to you when she's in trouble. If she fears you, she runs to the wolves, because the wolves might be nice for 5 minutes. I don't know how to fix it, Robert admitted, his voice cracking. It was the first honest thing he had said all day. I don't know how to stop. If I let go, she'll spin out. She is already spinning out, I said. She is 7 runaways deep into a spin. The only way to stop the spin is to stop pushing. You have to step back. You have to drop the rope. I walked back to my chair and sat down, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. Here is the deal. I can help you, but the help isn't going to look like what you thought. I am not going to send Maya to a boot camp. I am not going to send her to a scared straight program. That would break her completely. She doesn't need to be broken. She needs to be built. I looked at Maya. And you, young lady, you have developed a reflex. You run when things get hard. That kept you alive, maybe. But it's a maladaptive coping mechanism now. You have to learn to stand your ground and use your voice, not your feet. But you can only do that if the ground feels safe. I can't go back there, Maya said again, shaking her head. Please don't make me go back there. I'm not sending you back to that house as it is today. I promised her. That house is a toxic environment. If I sent you back there tonight, you'd be gone by morning, and I wouldn't blame you. We need a timeout. A big one. I turned to the cameras. I have arranged for Maya to go to a dual diagnosis residential center called Aspen Roots. It's not a punishment center, it's a therapy center. It's a place where she can have her own room with no cameras, where she can have access to food without locks, where she can learn to process the trauma she has endured and learn to trust adults again. It is a soft landing, not a hard crash. I looked at Robert and Cynthia. And while she is there, you two are going to work. You are going to work harder than you have ever worked in your lives. I have a team of family dynamic specialists here in Los Angeles. You are going to undergo intensive deprogramming. We are going to strip away the control freak tendencies. We are going to deal with your anxiety, Robert, because that's what this is. Your anxiety is masquerading as authority. And Cynthia, we are going to help you find your voice so you stop being a passenger in your own family's destruction. But she needs discipline. Robert tried a weak echo of his former self. She needs a father, I corrected him. She has plenty of discipline. It takes a lot of discipline to survive on the streets for a week. She needs a dad who hugs her, not one who handcuffs the pantry. You have to earn the right to be her father again. Right now, you're just her warden. And wardens don't get invited to weddings. Wardens don't get to see the grandkids. Wardens get left behind. Robert nodded slowly. The fight was gone. He looked defeated, which was exactly where he needed to be to start learning. You can't fill a cup that is already full of itself. He had to be emptied out to make room for something new. Maya, I said, you are going to go to Aspen Roots tonight. You don't have to go home with them. You are going to get on a plane with 2 of my staff members who will treat you with respect. You are going to eat a hot meal that you didn't have to steal. And you are going to sleep in a bed where nobody is watching you. How does that sound? For the first time, a small, genuine tear rolled down Maya's cheek. It sounds quiet, she whispered. Quiet is good, I said. Quiet is where the healing starts. The confrontation was over. The walls had come down, but the outcome was still hanging in the balance. We had stopped the bleeding, but the patient was still in critical condition. The easy part was the TV show. The hard part was the life that came after the credits rolled. I wish I could tell you that every story ends with a neat bow where the family hugs, the music swells, and they walk off into a sunset of perfect understanding. But in my line of work, that's rare. People are messy. Trauma is sticky. It doesn't wash off just because you had a breakthrough moment under studio lights. The real work happens in the unglamorous silence of therapy rooms, in the hard conversations over breakfast, in the moments where you have to choose patience over control for the 1,000th time. Maya went to Aspen Roots. For the first 30 days, she didn't speak to anyone. My team there reported that she would sit in the common room watching the other kids laugh and play cards, looking like she was observing an alien species. She hoarded food in her socks, granola bars, apples, crackers, not because she was hungry, but because the muscle memory of deprivation was so deep in her bones. The staff didn't punish her. They didn't take the food away. They simply put a basket of snacks in her room and said, "This is yours. It will always be here." It took 3 weeks for her to stop hiding the apples. That was the first victory. A small, silent victory over the fear of scarcity. Back in Los Angeles, Robert and Cynthia were in the trenches. My therapist, Dr. Lawton, and Dr. Cohen were grinding them down. Robert fought it. He called the center every day, demanding updates, demanding to speak to the director, demanding to know why Maya wasn't fixed yet. He was treating her recovery like a project management schedule. Dr. Lawton had to ban him from calling. He told Robert, every time you call to check on her progress, you are proving that you don't trust the process. You are proving that your anxiety is more important than her space. Robert raged. He threatened to sue. He threatened to pull Maya out, but he didn't, because deep down beneath the bluster and the ego, he knew I was right. He knew he had lost her, and this was the Hail Mary pass. 3 months in, we had a family session via video link. Maya was looking better. She had gained weight. Her skin wasn't gray anymore. She was wearing clothes that fit. She sat next to her primary therapist, looking at the screen where her parents sat in my office. "Hi," she said. "Hi, honey," Cynthia said, tearing up immediately. "We miss you so much." "We just want you home," Robert added, leaning into the camera. "We've made changes. I took the locks off. The cameras are gone." Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's not about the locks, Dad," she said. "It's about why you put them there. You thought I was bad. You thought I was stealing from you. Do you still think I'm bad?" Robert hesitated. That hesitation was a chasm. He was trying to find the right answer, the answer that would get him what he wanted rather than the honest answer. I think we had a misunderstanding," Robert said carefully. "I think we both made mistakes." I cut the feed. The screen went black. Robert looked at me shocked. "Why did you do that?" "Because you are lying," I said. "And she knows it. You are still blaming her. We both made mistakes. Robert, you locked the food. You put cameras in her vent. That is not a mistake on her part. That is abuse on your part. Until you can own that fully, without the buts, without the both sides nonsense, you are not safe for her. She isn't coming home." Robert slumped in his chair. I don't know how to be the bad guy, he confessed. I've always been the provider, the protector. If I admit I abused her, then what am I? You're a man who made a mistake and is fixing it, I said. That's a hell of a lot better than being a man who pretends he's perfect while his daughter destroys herself. It took another 3 months. 6 months total. 6 months of grueling work. Robert had to deconstruct his own childhood, his own father who demanded perfection, his own fear of losing control. He had to learn that a child's independence isn't a threat to his authority. Cynthia had to learn to stop being a peacekeeper and start being a parent. She had to learn that protecting her husband's ego was not more important than protecting her daughter's soul. When Maya finally came home, there were no cameras. But more importantly, there was a contract. Not a contract of rules for her, but a contract of behavior for them. If Robert raised his voice, the conversation ended. If he tried to restrict food, Maya had the right to call her therapist immediately. If they fell back into old patterns, Maya went back to aspen roots, no questions asked. The power dynamic had shifted. Maya wasn't the inmate anymore. She was a stakeholder. The first week was excruciatingly awkward. They walked around each other like strangers. But on the fourth day, something happened. Maya dropped a glass of milk in the kitchen. It shattered. Milk splattered everywhere. In the old days, this would have been the trigger for a 2-hour lecture on carelessness, disrespect, and the cost of milk. Maya froze. Her shoulders hunched up, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the yell. Robert walked into the kitchen. He saw the glass. He saw the milk. He saw his daughter flinching, preparing for impact. He stopped. He took a deep breath. I wasn't there, but he told me later that he could hear my voice in his head. Do you want to be right or do you want to be her father? Don't move, Robert said quietly. You're barefoot. You'll cut yourself. He went to the closet, the one that used to be locked, and got the broom. He swept up the glass. He got a towel and wiped up the milk. Maya didn't move. She just watched him, her eyes wide. It's just milk, Robert said, tossing the wet paper towels in the trash. Are you okay? Maya nodded, unable to speak. Okay, Robert said. Let's get some dinner. That was the breakthrough. Not the TV show, not the therapy sessions, that moment in the kitchen. That was the outcome. It wasn't perfect. They still argued. Robert still had to catch himself before he snapped. Cynthia still had to remind herself not to fade into the background. But the cycle of running was broken because the reason for running was gone. The house was no longer a prison. It was just a house filled with flawed people trying to do better. A year later, I got a letter from Maya. No email. A handwritten letter. Dear Dr. Phil, I'm graduating next week. I didn't think I'd make it to senior year. I thought I'd be dead or in jail. My dad is trying. He's annoying sometimes. He still worries too much. But he doesn't lock the doors anymore, and he knocks before he comes in my room. It seems small, but it feels huge. I'm going to community college in the fall. I want to be a social worker. I want to help kids who run away. I want to tell them that running doesn't fix it, but staying only works if the people you're staying with are willing to change. Thank you for making them change. Thank you for believing me about the fridge. Sincerely, Maya. I keep that letter in my desk. It's a reminder that we don't do this for the ratings. We don't do this for the drama. We do it for the kids who are screaming in silence, waiting for someone to pick up the decoder ring and understand their language. Maya wasn't a runaway. She was a refugee in her own life, and all she needed was for someone to negotiate a peace treaty so she could finally come home. That's the truth of it. You can't force a child to respect you. You can't lock a child into loving you. Love is a voluntary reaction to safety. Create the safety and the child returns. Destroy the safety and they run. It's simple physics. And sometimes it takes a bald guy from Texas to remind people of the laws of gravity.